I still remember the moment his words fell into the room like a quiet stone sinking into still water. There was no shouting, no anger, no raised voice, just a soft, tired sentence spoken by the man I had spent half my life loving. He looked at me, not with hatred, but with something far colder, indifference. And in that calm, steady voice, he said, "Your efforts never really mattered, you know?" For a few seconds, I could not even breathe. I just stood there, holding the tea tray I had brought for him, not knowing whether to place it on the table or hold on to it like a shield. A part of me wanted to ask him what he meant. Another part of me, a tired, older part, already knew. Maybe those words had been forming inside his heart for years. Maybe I had been too busy trying to hold the pieces of our life together to see that something inside him was quietly drifting away. Or maybe life had worn us down in ways neither of us fully understood. Outside our window, the evening light was falling gently, turning everything golden. It was the kind of moment that should have felt peaceful. But inside me, something was breaking very quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just breaking. I remember setting the tray down with shaking hands. The cups clinked softly. He didn't notice. In that moment, I felt every sacrifice I had made over the years rise inside my mind like old photographs. Late nights cooking when I was sick. The times I stayed up waiting for him. The dreams I had put aside so he could chase his. The family I had protected, held, stitched together with my bare hands. Everything I had given suddenly felt weightless, as if none of it lived in his memory anymore. And in a strange way, the silence after his words hurt even more than the words themselves. Because silence meant it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was the truth he had been carrying inside him. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stood there, feeling the air change around us, as if a long love story had quietly turned a page without my permission. And that was the moment everything began to shift inside my heart. Because once someone tells you your efforts never mattered, nothing feels the same again. Title: When My Husband Said My Efforts Never Mattered. For most of my life, I believed marriages did not fall apart suddenly. They softened at the edges, slowly, the way paper fades in sunlight. A little each day, so gently, you don't notice until the color is almost gone. Looking back now, I can see how our story had been fading for a long time. But at the time, I thought everything was normal. Or at least normal enough for two people who had lived together for nearly 20 years. My name is Amina, and I always thought of myself as the kind of woman who stayed steady even in storms. The kind who held her home together with quiet hands and an even quieter heart. When I married my husband Imran, I was only 23. Young, hopeful, and full of ideas about what love should look like. We started our life in a small apartment with cracked paint and old kitchen tiles. But back then, even that felt like a palace. Because we had dreams, simple ones, but bright. In those early years, Imran used to laugh more. His laughter filled the rooms, loud and carefree, bouncing off the walls like music. He would come home from work, throw his bag onto the chair, and kiss my forehead before I could even take the tea off the stove. I remember the way his eyes used to soften whenever he saw me. The way he would say, "Amina, you make this house feel like a home." I held on to those words for years, maybe too tightly. As time passed, life settled into routines. The routines turned into habits, and the habits turned into unspoken expectations. When we finally moved into a bigger home, something we had worked for, my life became a list of daily tasks: cooking, cleaning, managing the house, supporting his parents, handling the bills when he forgot, caring for him when he worked late, and sacrificing small dreams of my own without ever saying them out loud. I don't think he ever asked me to sacrifice anything. He just grew used to it. And well, I grew used to giving without being asked. That's how most wives are raised, to fill the gaps quietly, to hold everyone together, to love by carrying more than their share. Imran worked hard, I won't deny that. He carried his own weight. But somewhere along the way, we stopped talking the way we used to. Conversations became short, routine, predictable. Instead of asking, "How was your day?" he would ask, "Did the bill get paid? Did the repairman come? Did you buy groceries?" Small questions, but slowly they replaced the bigger ones. Sometimes I would wait at the dining table at night, hoping he'd come home early so we could eat together. But work became his world, and home became something he stepped into only after he was tired. There were mornings when we'd sit across from each other, sipping tea, yet our silence felt louder than any argument. I kept telling myself, this is marriage. It happens. People change, but love remains. And for a very long time, I believed that. My silent sacrifices. There are things wives give up that no one sees. I remember wanting to take a small course, something simple, just to learn a new skill. But his work timing clashed and someone needed to be home. So I told him I wasn't interested anymore. I remember wanting to visit my parents more often, but his mother was unwell, and I chose to stay. He noticed my presence, but he never noticed my absence. I remember nights when I fell asleep alone because he was busy finishing office work. I remember mornings when I woke up early just to prepare his breakfast, even when I was sick. These aren't big sacrifices, not dramatic, not movie-worthy, just the quiet ones that sit in the corners of a woman's heart. But they add up, and over the years, I began to feel like a shadow in my own home, present, helpful, essential even, but rarely seen. His change was subtle. Imran wasn't cruel. He wasn't a bad man. He didn't shout, didn't insult, didn't hurt me. Sometimes I wish he had, because at least then I would have had something concrete to point to, something I could name. But indifference? Indifference is a quieter kind of hurt. It creeps into the spaces between two people and settles there like dust. It doesn't cause a storm. It causes silence. He stopped noticing little things, like when I changed my hairstyle, or when I bought new plates for the kitchen, or when I cooked his favorite dish without him asking. He stopped asking how I slept, stopped holding my hand while crossing the street, stopped remembering small details of our conversations. I kept telling myself, he's tired, he's busy, it's just stress. And maybe that was true. But I never asked, and he never offered. Two people living under the same roof can feel like strangers without even realizing it. The day everything shifted slightly. One evening, long before the day he said those painful words, I noticed something. He came home late as usual. I had kept dinner warm for too long, and the food had gone cold. I apologized, feeling guilty for something that wasn't even my fault. He looked at the food, then at me, and said softly, "It's okay, Amina. You don't have to try so hard." At the time, I thought it was a comforting sentence. Now I realize it was the first sign he had stopped valuing the effort behind the actions. Because when someone stops seeing the effort, they eventually stop seeing you. Why I stayed silent. I'm not proud of this, but I didn't speak up. Not once. Not about the loneliness, not about the fading conversations, not about my unspoken disappointments. I thought silence was strength. I thought patience would solve everything. I thought love could survive without being watered. But even flowers die if you forget to give them sunlight. And our marriage, slowly, began to wilt. Not because we stopped loving each other, but because we stopped nourishing that love. And then one ordinary evening, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, he said the sentence that made all my quiet sacrifices feel invisible. At that moment, I finally realized we had been living two different versions of the same marriage. Rising conflict rarely begins with loud arguments or broken things. Sometimes it begins with a single sentence, the kind spoken so quietly that only your heart hears the truth inside it. After that evening, the evening when Imran said my efforts never really mattered, I noticed a shift inside me. Not in him, in me. It was like someone had turned on a small light inside my chest, revealing corners I had kept dark for years. And with that light came questions I had never dared to ask. The first signs of emotional distance. A few days after his comment, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I cooked breakfast, I cleaned the house, I washed his clothes, I smiled when he came home, but something inside me had changed. It was in the way I moved, the way I spoke, the way I looked at him and wondered, when did we stop being partners and start living like roommates? One morning, I noticed he didn't wait for me to sit at the table before starting breakfast, a small thing, but it made me feel like an afterthought. He didn't do it intentionally, he just didn't think. Later that evening, I asked softly, "Did you read the message I sent you today?" He looked up from his phone and said, "What message?" I had sent him a simple little text, a picture of the sunset from our window, and the words, "Reminds me of the days we used to sit here together." He hadn't even seen it. I felt invisible in ways I couldn't explain. The dinner where silence spoke loudest. There was one dinner that stands out clearly. I had made his favorite dish, chicken karahi, with fresh coriander. He used to love it. He used to say it tasted better than anything from a restaurant. But that night, he ate quietly, barely tasting the food. Not once did he look at me. At one point, I asked, "Is it okay?" He nodded, still scrolling on his phone. I watched him for a long moment and finally asked, "Imran, are you upset with me?" He looked genuinely surprised. "No, why would I be?" His answer was simple, soft, not defensive, not harsh. But it made me feel even more alone, because sometimes indifference hurts more than anger. Our conversations became practical, not personal. Our conversations turned into lists. Did you pay the bill? Can you call the plumber? Where's my blue shirt? Did the groceries arrive? I'll be late. Don't wait for me. Lists, reminders, updates. No, how was your day? No, did you eat? No, I missed you. And I didn't know how to ask for these things without sounding needy. So I remained quiet, carrying a heaviness inside me that grew each day. His growing irritation. Imran began getting irritated easily, not angry, just distant. If I asked the question twice, he would sigh. If I reminded him of something, he would say, Amina, I know. You don't have to repeat everything. Sometimes he would come home tired and go straight to the bedroom, closing the door behind him. Not slamming it, just closing it. But even soft doors can separate two people. At night, he stopped reaching for my hand in his sleep. I used to wake up with his arm around me, but now he slept facing the opposite direction, far away on the other side of the bed. These small things, they cut quietly. The day I realized I was serving, not sharing. One afternoon, I was folding his clothes. A simple task. Routine. But suddenly, I stopped and stared at the shirt in my hands. I wondered, when was the last time he had thanked me for anything? Not a big thank you, just a simple one. I tried to recall the moment, but I couldn't. That realization felt like a punch to the chest. I was living like a caretaker, not a wife. I was serving him, not sharing life with him. And the more I noticed this, the more it hurt. Pretending in front of family. Family gatherings became harder. Everyone saw us as a strong couple. People often told me, "You're so lucky, Amina. Imran is such a good husband." I smiled politely, but inside, I felt a small ache because they were praising a version of him I no longer knew. Whenever someone asked him to take a picture with me, he would stand stiffly beside me, his arm barely touching mine. His smile felt like something he practiced for other people, not something he gave to me. The night he forgot something important. One evening, I waited for him with dinner. It was our anniversary. Nothing fancy, just a quiet dinner at home. We had never been the couple who needed expensive celebrations. I had decorated the living room gently with candles, just a few, soft and warm. I wore the sari he once said made me look beautiful. He came home 2 hours late, tired, distracted. He didn't even notice the candles or the food. He walked straight to the bedroom and changed into his nightwear. When he came out, I whispered, "Imran, it's our anniversary." He paused, looked at me, and said, "Oh, I I forgot. Sorry." He sat down and started eating, not realizing what that moment did to me. I didn't cry. I just blew out the candles one by one. He didn't even ask why. Signs he was slipping away. There were more signs, small but sharp. One, he stopped asking me to accompany him anywhere. He began leaving earlier for work. He spent more time on his phone than talking to me. He forgot things about me, my favorite flower, my favorite tea, the book I had been reading. He began talking to me like I was someone who lived in the background. At times, I wondered if he was tired of me, but I never voiced it. Fear kept me quiet. Fear of hearing a truth I wasn't ready for. The hurt I hid inside. I began hiding my emotions so well that even I couldn't recognize them. I swallowed them like bitter medicine.
When he came home late, I said, "It's okay." When he forgot things that mattered, I said, "It's fine." When he didn't notice my efforts, I said, "It doesn't matter." But inside, each hurt stacked on top of the other, forming a quiet wall between us. And he continued living as if nothing had changed. The night I heard him say something that broke me. One night he was on a call in the living room. I wasn't trying to overhear. I had come out to get a glass of water. I heard him laugh softly, a laugh I hadn't heard in a long time. And he said, "I'm just tired of the same things every day. Nothing ever changes at home." He wasn't talking about work. He was talking about our home, me. I froze behind the kitchen door, clutching the glass tightly. My hands were shaking. So, he was tired. He was bored. He did feel something was missing. But he didn't tell me. He told someone else. That night I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of the man who didn't know how much he had hurt me. I realized then, our marriage wasn't just drifting, it was slowly drowning, and I didn't know how to save something when I was the only one swimming. And then came the moment that changed everything. The rising conflict had been growing for months, a slow, quiet storm. But the turning point, the moment that broke whatever fragile thread was left, that moment was still ahead of me, and it would hurt more deeply, more permanently than anything before it. I still remember the evening when everything changed. It was a quiet day, the kind of day when the house feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. The sky was dull, and the air had that soft smell of dust right before the rain. I had spent most of the afternoon in the kitchen preparing dinner the way my husband liked it. Simple, warm, comforting. I wasn't trying to impress him, I just wanted to bring a little peace into our home. He came back later than usual. I heard the gate open, then close. His footsteps were slow, dragging, almost tired. I waited for him to come inside, hoping maybe today he would smile. Or even say hello. Something small, something human. Something that would show me that we were still partners. But he walked straight to the living room and sat down without a word. I followed him quietly, wiping my hands on the end of my dupatta. His face looked different. Not angry, not sad, just distant. Like he was somewhere I could not reach, no matter how hard I tried. I softly said, "Dinner is ready." He didn't answer.
He just looked at the table, then looked away. For a few seconds, I stood there, not knowing what to do. I felt foolish, like a guest in my own home. I sat on the chair across from him, waiting for him to speak. The silence stretched, long and uncomfortable. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could even hear my own breathing. Finally, he sighed. A deep, heavy sigh. And then he said the sentence that broke something inside me forever. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He just said it softly, almost tired. "Your efforts never mattered." For a moment, I couldn't understand the words. I heard them, but they didn't make sense. It felt like someone had suddenly taken the ground from under my feet. I blinked, hoping I had misheard. I whispered, "What do you mean?" He didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor as if talking to the tiles was easier than talking to me. All these years, he said, everything you did, it doesn't change anything. I felt my heart tighten. My fingers trembled. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. It was like my mind had gone blank, and only my heartbeat was left, echoing painfully inside my chest. I thought of all the years we had spent together, the early mornings, the late nights, the meals, the sacrifices, the quiet support, the prayers, the things I did silently without expecting anything in return. I thought of the moments I stood beside him when he was struggling, when he felt lost, when he needed someone to steady him. And now he was telling me none of it mattered. I tried to speak, but my voice felt tight. I did everything I knew. I tried. He shook his head lightly. You tried, but it was never enough. Those words stung even more. I wasn't expecting praise or gratitude. I wasn't even asking for love at that moment. All I had hoped for was acknowledgement, a simple recognition that I had stood by him even when life was not kind to us. I felt my tears rise, but I swallowed them down. I didn't want to cry in front of him, not because I was proud, but because I suddenly felt too small, too invisible. He continued, I don't want to pretend anymore. Pretend. That word hurt in a way I cannot describe. Pretend? Was our life pretend? Were my efforts pretend? Was my love pretend? I asked softly, is that how you truly feel? He finally looked at me, but the look was cold, distant, almost like I was a stranger. There was no softness, no memory, no warmth. Yes, this is how I feel. It was like someone had pressed a knife into my chest, but even then, I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't break. I simply sat there trying to hold myself together. The rain finally began outside, hitting the windows gently. It sounded like tiny knocks from the sky, soft but painful. The whole house felt different, as if the walls were listening, as if they already knew this moment was coming. I looked at him one last time and said, I didn't know my presence felt like a burden. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He just remained silent. And somehow that silence told me everything. I stood up slowly, careful not to make any sound. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to move. I walked to the kitchen. The food was still warm. The steam rising from the pot looked strange, like it didn't belong to this moment. I turned off the stove, covered the pots, and placed everything neatly on the counter. I moved quietly as if trying not to disturb the sadness floating in the air. Then I leaned against the counter and let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. That was the moment I realized something important, something painful, something frightening. Sometimes the person you love can look at you as if you never existed. Sometimes the years you give to someone can vanish in a single sentence. Sometimes a home can become a place where your heart no longer fits. But even in that moment, I didn't blame him. I didn't hate him. I just felt empty, completely empty, like someone had gently scooped out everything inside me. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, thinking quietly. The rain tapped on the windows, steady and soft. It matched the heaviness inside me. I wondered how two people could live in the same house and feel miles apart. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to explain myself anymore. I just wanted peace, even if it meant accepting that I could not give him what he wanted. Even if it meant accepting that my love was not enough for him. And that acceptance, that quiet, painful acceptance, was the real turning point. It was the moment I stopped hoping he would see me, the moment I stopped waiting for him to appreciate me, the moment I realized love cannot survive on one person's effort alone. It was the moment I truly felt alone, even though he was sitting just a few steps away. And sometimes, the deepest heartbreak doesn't come from loud fights or harsh words. It comes from quiet sentences spoken in a tired voice. It comes from moments when someone tells you, without shouting, that your heart was never enough for them. That night changed everything between us. That night changed everything inside me. The next morning, the house felt different, quieter, heavier, almost as if it was holding its breath along with me. I woke up before dawn, something I often did, but this time there was no real reason to rise. I just couldn't sleep anymore. My eyes felt swollen, though I didn't remember crying. Sometimes pain doesn't fall like tears. Sometimes it just settles inside the chest, like a stone too heavy to lift. I went to the kitchen without turning on the light. The soft glow from the window was enough. The sky outside was a pale gray, the kind that holds light but not warmth. I stood there for a few moments, just listening to the silence. And in that silence, I finally allowed myself to breathe. For the first time in many years, I wasn't thinking about what he wanted, or what he preferred, or how he liked things done. I wasn't thinking of ways to fix something, or ways to make things smoother, or ways to keep peace. I was just thinking of myself. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable, but also necessary. I made tea, slowly, quietly, as if the world had softened around me. When I poured it into a cup and sat down at the table, I realized something surprising. This was the first peaceful moment I had felt in a long time. Not a happy moment, not a strong moment, just peaceful. And sometimes, peace is the first sign that healing has finally begun. He came into the kitchen a little later. His face looked tired too, but in a different way. Maybe he had slept fine. Maybe he hadn't. I didn't ask. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible for his feelings. He sat across from me. The silence between us felt like a thin wall, one that could break with a single word, but neither of us wanted to speak first. After a while, he said softly, "You didn't sleep." I shook my head. "No, not much." He nodded. There was no apology in his eyes, no guilt, no realization, just acknowledgement. And somehow that told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't angry. He was simply disconnected, emotionally, mentally, quietly. He had drifted away from me long before he spoke those painful words. I had been holding on to a rope that he had already let go of. He said, "I'm going to the shop. We can talk later." Talk later. That used to be a sentence full of hope. A sentence that meant things could be fixed. A sentence that meant he cared. But now, it felt empty. There was nothing left to discuss. I nodded again, and he left. When the door closed, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I realized something important in that moment. Sometimes resolution doesn't come from a heartfelt conversation. Sometimes it doesn't come from apologies or explanations or promises. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. Quiet, gentle acceptance. Acceptance that I could not change him. Acceptance that my worth wasn't tied to his recognition. Acceptance that my love, even if unseen, still had value. Acceptance that I deserved softness too. Soft words, soft moments, soft care. That afternoon, I decided to take a small step for myself. Something simple. Something I had not done in a long, long time. I went for a walk. The air outside was cool. The streets smelled of wet dust from the rain the night before. Children played near the corner, shouting and laughing, their voices full of life. A shopkeeper sweeping the front of his store nodded at me. I smiled back. A simple exchange, but it warmed my heart more than any words my husband had spoken in months. As I walked, I felt my shoulders loosen, as if each step carried away a little of the weight I had been carrying. I reached a small bench under a tree and sat there. The breeze touched my face gently, almost like comfort. And for the first time in days, my thoughts were not heavy. I remembered the girl I used to be, hopeful, soft, loving, patient. She wasn't perfect, but she tried. She always tried. And somewhere along the way, I had forgotten her. But she was still inside me. She had survived all those years. She had survived the loneliness. She had survived the silence. She had survived the sentence that broke her heart. And now she was finally waking up again. I put my hand on my chest and whispered to myself, "Your efforts mattered, even if he couldn't see them." And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not bitterness, not disappointment, just clarity. Clarity that a person's inability to appreciate you does not decrease your value. Clarity that you can give your heart fully and still not be seen, and it is not your fault. Clarity that love is not measured by the reaction of others, but by the purity of your intentions. I stayed there for a long while, letting the peace settle into my bones. And then I walked back home, not because I had to, but because I chose to. When I returned, the house no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a place I could reclaim, a place where I could slowly build myself again, even if everything wasn't perfect. My husband came home in the evening. We ate quietly. No harsh words, no cold silence. Just two people sharing space with different hearts. But I wasn't waiting for him to change anymore. I wasn't waiting for appreciation or acknowledgement. I wasn't waiting for him to finally see me. I had already seen myself. And that was the real resolution. Soft, quiet, powerful. Like the first ray of sunlight after a long night. Sometimes life doesn't end with a big moment. Sometimes there is no grand apology, no powerful change, no dramatic reunion. Sometimes life ends a chapter quietly, almost silently. And that is what happened with me. In the days that followed, nothing dramatic changed in my house. My husband still spoke little. He still busied himself with his work. He still lived in his own quiet world, unaware of how deeply his words had shaped the space between us. But something had changed within me. I stopped tying my worth to his reactions. I stopped measuring my value through his silence. I stopped waiting for appreciation that might never come. Instead, I began appreciating myself. I started with small things. A cup of tea made just the way I liked it. 10 minutes of sitting in the sunlight. A slow walk outside every other day. A journal where I wrote simple thoughts. Nothing deep, nothing heavy, just what I felt. Each little moment was like a thread, slowly stitching me back together. I didn't become a new person overnight. I didn't become stronger instantly. I didn't suddenly stop caring. But I became gentler with myself. One evening, about a week after everything happened, I found myself sitting near the window. The breeze was soft, and the sky was painted in fading shades of orange and blue. It reminded me of how endings and beginnings blend into each other, almost without notice. My husband walked into the room. He looked at me, then looked away, as if unsure whether to speak. Finally, he said softly, "Did you eat?" It wasn't an apology. It wasn't recognition. It wasn't what I had once desperately wished to hear. But strangely, it didn't hurt anymore. I looked at him, really looked, and realized that expecting him to become someone different had been my biggest burden, and letting go of that expectation was my biggest freedom. I answered gently, "Yes, I did." And that was enough. For him, for me, for the moment. As he walked away, I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. There was no ache in my chest, no heaviness on my shoulders, just a quiet acceptance. Maybe he would never truly understand what I had given. Maybe he would never see the sacrifices I made. Maybe he would never know how much I carried silently, hoping for nothing but love in return. But I knew, and knowing my own truth brought me a peace I had been searching for all along. In that calm silence, I realized something important. Love doesn't fail when someone doesn't appreciate you. Love fails when you stop appreciating yourself. I opened my eyes and looked outside again. The sky was darker now, but beautiful in its own gentle way. A new kind of hope settled inside me. Not the hope that he would change, but the hope that I would grow. And I did. I learned that self-worth isn't given, it's discovered. It's protected. It's nurtured quietly, patiently, every day. I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I deserve better." Sometimes it simply says, "I am enough." And I learned that endings don't mean failure. Sometimes they simply mean transformation. As I prepare to close this chapter of my story, I carry one gentle lesson in my heart. Even when others forget your sacrifices, never forget your own strength. Even when someone stops seeing you, never stop seeing yourself. Because the truth is simple. Life may not always give us the recognition we deserve, but it always gives us the chance to rise again, quietly, softly, beautifully, in our own time. And that is the ending of this story. Not with pain, not with regret, but with a softer beginning growing quietly inside me.